Hello, and welcome to the Uncensored Journey podcast, a raw, unfiltered guide to truths that matter. We are diving deep, getting real about what it takes to truly transform inside and out. Ready for truth? Ready for transformation? You're in the right spot. I'm Cindy, and with me, as always, is Gabriela. Now let's get uncensored. With us today, we have Kayla Yoder. Kayla is the founder of XFXM Global. It's a movement to heal the adversarial relationships between men and women. She's working to bridge the gap between genders through respect and understanding in order to create more harmony in partnerships as well as society. Kayla is an international speaker, author, dancer, and DJ, and is always finding new ways to activate people into their fullest and most authentic expression, all while discovering new aspects of herself along the way. That's interesting because also, Kayla, we wanted to talk to you. You recently transitioned from sex and intimacy to now exploring different aspects of romantic relationships. Do you want to tell us a little bit why the shift and how that came about?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here and for this conversation that will unfold in who knows what direction. My journey, I think for a lot of us, as we evolve personally, what we are focused on and what we're teaching or what we're bringing to the world also evolves. And that's definitely been the case for me. So I was really focused on sex and intimacy for several years, and that was twofold. So the first part of that is that sex has always been a fascination of mine ever since I was a very small child and exploring my body, figuring out those are like even the secondary erogenous zones. I remember I was 6 years old and discovering different pleasure centers and different erogenous zones in my body and really excited about it and wanted to tell my friends, which was not really approved of by parents, society. It's super taboo, right, for kids, especially in the US, to be discovering pleasure, physical pleasure at that age. So yeah, but my fascination with sex and physical pleasure really just continued. And I explored it for myself, by myself, with other people. They're up into my teenage years. But obviously, at some point, decided to have sex as a teenager. And then just, it was really driven by a curiosity to understand and to learn more and to have these experiences that were fun and enjoyable and exciting to me. I also think it's interesting because I am a little bit psychologically kinky. And so I really am turned on by things that are considered taboo. And there's a line, like for me, for myself, there's a line. I'm never going to yuck anybody's yum. But I think that even as I was progressing in my teenage years, it was taboo. It was like just exploring your sexuality in general. So I think that was part of the draw for me, if I'm being totally honest. So yeah, that was a big piece of it. And then the intimacy part. So intimacy is probably my biggest fear in the entire world. And the idea of being fully seen and loved and just that vulnerable, it just, oh, yeah, my entire body says avoid at all costs. So most of that sex exploration I was doing was very much just the sex piece because you can have sex without intimacy. Although turns out sex is much more pleasurable and more enjoyable with intimacy. But my avoidance of intimacy, yeah, took a long time for me to discover. So yeah, I would say the it was my upbringing and the combination of those things that really drove me into the sex and intimacy piece. I think along my personal journey, being with women sexually and romantically really created a lot of safety for me to bring more intimacy into sex. There's something so safe with just being with another woman compared to being with men in really any context, right? We just can create a different level of safety or a different type of safety for one another. So anyway, that was that piece. And then as I continued to evolve and I was exploring my sexuality further with deeper intimacy, I started exploring different types of relationship styles as well, of polyamory or open relationships or things like that. I was dating women, I was dating men, I was having this full just exploration to see what things felt like for me, what I liked, what I didn't like. Some of the decisions I made were honestly with the intention of healing abandonment wounds. I'm one of those people that goes big or goes home. And sometimes I accidentally traumatize myself in the process. And that's a little bit what happened there. I was like, oh, I'm just going to really try this thing and maybe it'll heal my abandonment wounds and maybe I'll traumatize myself deeper. Probably both happened, actually. It was quite transformational, but yeah, and through all of that, I started getting really curious about men. I started diving into a lot of Alison Armstrong's work. I had gone back to dating men again and was really curious about the differences romantically and just otherwise. And as I started learning about men, I had a paradigm shift in terms of what I thought was true about men and what I had been, yeah, like taught to believe and conditioned into believing about men versus what was actually true. And I was testing on men I was dating, on friends, like my boyfriends. I was like just testing constantly with them to see if what information I was given, if it was really true. And I just was constantly blown away by what I was learning and by getting the validation of, oh my gosh, men are responding to me so differently when I act a different way, or when I treat them differently, or when I say this type of thing, or I use these different words, or whatever it was. And that was the shift for me. I became totally obsessed, just dove super deep into that. And then at some point, I looked around and realized that I was the only woman I knew who was looking at men and talking about men so much differently than the way that other women do. And I just would go into new social situations or meet new women or and hear the way that they would talk about men, and I would go home and cry. Or I'd go home and I'd spend time with family members or like old friends and see their relationship dynamics and see the way that women were emasculating men, like not on purpose, just because that's what we were taught to do was normal. And I just, it like broke me. Yeah. And I was like, I can't sit by and watch this. I can't even have friends anymore. I had a whole existential crisis. And yeah, it therefore came this new path of healing that relationship. So that was very long-winded, but I think that covers it decently.
That's awesome. I was listening to you talk. I have a similar awakening of how men are treated in society now, and it's all learned behavior that we have been taught. I think for unpopular opinion, I'm a big fan of like traditional roles. So I'm good with a man being a man. I like that manly man. Like what is described as toxic masculinity, I'm like, that's my type, sign me up. But toxic masculinity movement that has happened in this country or in this world, I guess, right now is I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that in regards to women, because I feel like what we're describing as toxic masculinity are men who are actually less like who are being men, but that doesn't mean that you have to be less of a woman to be with that man. And it's not a toxic thing to want to have a traditional setting where, men have men's roles and women have women's roles. But that's not to say that they're not equal in a relationship. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that dynamic, and especially the movement, like the toxic masculinity movement, and also like what we're calling the toxic feminism movement, because I think we've gotten so far from just respecting each other as a gender. So thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. It is interesting. I do think we've gotten really far from respecting each other as a gender, but I think it's more one-sided. It feels like there's a fight happening, but women are the only ones fighting. Like men don't know that there's a war. They're like, we're at war with men. And the men are like, we are? I'm confused. They're like, we're just here to live good lives and love women and what's happening. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think that a lot of what's being called toxic masculine right now is just masculine. And there are things that are toxic masculinity. Like, sure, there's like overly aggressive or overly controlling, or, right? All of these traits. And the same with the feminine, right? All of these traits can be toxic if you go super overboard or don't check in and are not in integrity.
Yeah.
But on their own, aggression, competitiveness, like that structure, the discipline, or even, yeah, the protector role. And they get a little aggressive when they're protecting the people they love. And that's great. That is just being a man. And I'm with you. I'm here for the traditional gender roles. And that's not something that I wouldn't say is what's best for everyone per se. But I do think that those traditional gender roles really allow for us to be more of our authentic selves, and most people would probably be happier, I think, in those roles. But we're so far from that point that it's so taboo to say that, especially as a woman, right? Because we're supposed to be like, yes, like women can do whatever they want to do. And I'm here for that. Women can do whatever they want to do. I love that we have equal opportunity. I love that we have the freedom of choice. That's amazing. And I'm like, I could hustle and be a strong, independent woman. And no, do I need a man? No. But do I want to do that? Hell no, absolutely not. I was not built for that and I don't want to do it. I'm tired. Yeah. And I think most women would probably feel that way if they actually took some time and came back into their authentic nature and really surrendered into the feminine, felt what that was like for them. And I mean, we all have it's a spectrum, right? We're all somewhere between way more feminine and more towards the middle of the masculine feminine balance within us. But gosh, yeah, I think I actually wonder. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on this. So what I would love to know, and I don't know that we're going to have an answer, but I would love to know what you think is, yeah. So if women, how many women are not actually speaking out right now? Because I think it's really taboo to speak out against women or to call other women out. So if there's a woman being, yeah, like feminism, or, oh yeah, women empowerment, or whatever it is that they're saying. And it's really hard right now, I think, to call women out and say, hey, like this actually doesn't apply to me, or hey, I actually don't necessarily agree with what you're saying about men, or well, this generalization. And I'm curious to know how many women actually agree with us and just aren't saying anything, versus how much our society has completely masked this aspect of femininity. I don't know. Does that make sense?
It does. I was
Okay.
just, as you were talking, I was thinking about the expectations of women in the media. We've gotten so far away from what feminism started to be, what the purpose of feminism was. And now feminism is dancing naked or simulating sex on stage or like for the camera or on social media. And to me, that's not femininity. Femininity is just like traditional traits of a woman, nurturing, caring. Yeah, I'm equal to the man that I'm with, but we're different. Equality doesn't mean the same, right? So there's inherent differences between a man and a woman. And I think we've gotten so far from that original feminist movement, what that meant. So now it's just like like I said, toxic femininity, where there's just women who, I don't know, mental illness or like lack of love growing up or trauma, whatever it was, that I want to be heard. I want to be heard. I want to be heard. And so I'm going to make the spectacle of myself to try to say, and then I'm going to use that guise of all men are trash. And I don't think that's very fair, because I know my dad was a great man. My dad took care of my mom for 50 years. And my mom, when he died, my mom didn't know how to pump gas because she never had to. That's the type of man. My brother is a good man, a good husband, a good father. And those are the men in my life that I look at and I'm like, okay, I don't want anything less than that. Just there's these people like, I'm very lucky that I had that example because I'm able to now be able to expect more out of a man, but also understand that's what a man does. A man opened your car door, not because you can't, but because he wants to, or because you deserve that as a woman, right? Opens the door and lets you walk first because it's a protective thing. He's protecting you, whatever. I like that. And I really, and about calling out women, I do call out women. I'm like, what's the matter with that? Like, why is that toxic? Why do you think that's toxic? And so I'll break it down with them and say, maybe that's just masculinity. Maybe that's just a trait of a man because they don't do the things that we're doing doesn't make them wrong. It just makes them different. And you're right. I think a lot of us who think the same way, need to definitely move past what society and media and social media is like the whatever, but what that's telling us to think and start thinking for ourselves. Break it down, like you said, break it down, get to know you. What do you really want? I like cooking and baking and being in the kitchen and sewing and crocheting. And I like all those quote unquote old lady hobbies. I'm a canner. Like I do things like that. And I like to cook for my man. I like to make sure he has what he needs. I like to whatever, but in return, like I get so many things from them as well. It's just a give and take. And for the longest time, I was pointing out all the things that he wasn't doing. And then somebody said, why don't you start focusing on the things that he does do? And that was such a bigger list than the things that he wasn't doing. But I was focusing on such the negative that the positives just weren't there. But I agree with you. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Women speaking out. And yeah, I would be curious to see how many
Yeah.
more women would speak out.
And
It
yeah.
just, yeah.
I think more
Yeah.
conversations like this. I know Gabriela had something she wanted to add to this, so I'm going to shut up.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. But I think something to consider worth mentioning is there are two environments where women interact with men, right? Like we're talking about romantic relationships, and then we're talking about like the workspace. And I think there's a context for everything. At work, you have the option of doing two things: either lead as in your feminine power or lead in your masculine power. And I think you'll get two different outcomes and results. However, in certain industries, the masculine approach that a woman takes is more respected than the feminine approach. So I think there's that side of the equation and of the conversation. And then there's the community and society as a whole and the romantic aspect, and how, unfortunately, what I've noticed, and I speak for myself as also as an observer, we often take our work home. And so like we're constantly in a space of being overly independent, overly in our power, in our masculine, and not really creating the space and allowing for the man to be the man, right? And for that true and healthy masculinity to shine through. Because us as women, we are the creator of and the container of the relationship. And I think that in some cases, we suffocate the relationship, or we suffocate the man to the point that like there's no need for him to be needed, right? Like men love to be acknowledged. They love to be needed. And just like Cindy and you said, there's different skills that complement us can't be exhibited because, hey, I could do whatever a man can do. Like, why do I need a man? So I guess my question for you is what's your take on being an empowered woman in your divine feminine at work versus at home? And how do we make that transition easier or make it flow more?
Yeah. Yeah. I do think it's really interesting in the workplace because I don't think that men, when they built these systems and structures before women were really in the workplace, they were building them for men because that was who was there. And they were, and so the way that business is done and the structure of the workplace is very much to accommodate men and not women. And then women came in, and again, like it's not, there's such a narrative around like, oh, the patriarchy and like the men are trying. It's so inconsiderate. And maybe things could change totally, but this wasn't malicious. And I think it is interesting because I think women are so much more powerful in their feminine energy, also in the workplace. And of course, it requires some masculine energy when you're working because that's the action, the doing is the masculine. But led from feminine inspiration was really the sweet spot. And I think if women can learn how to do that at work, it will completely like transform their careers. And even for me in my business and work and whatever, when I am coming from a more feminine place, I'm way more productive, actually. I get way more done and I have way more fun. It's just I think it's really hard to find that spot because of all of our conditioning of how to work is so masculine. And for our entire lives, that's the way we've been doing it. So that's what I'll say about that. I'm trying to figure it out myself right now. It's possible, but it's hard to get right all the time or find that balance. But I think as far as bringing it home, transition rituals are a must, especially if you are working in masculine energy or even in the balance. If you're working between feminine and masculine energy throughout the day, I would say if you want to have a relationship with polarity where you are in your feminine and you're with a masculine man, then a transition ritual is essential. And I don't think you can go home to your man without doing it. And you can't bring your work home. It's just like not an option. Or you can set certain parameters and boundaries around that too, right? Where you don't interact with your partner until that's completed or whatever it is. I think it needs to be a separate work. And where you're bringing that masculine energy needs to be completely separate as much as possible from your relationship if you want a dynamic with a masculine man. And before you go back into that dynamic, take 15, 30 minutes, the drive home, listening to Mariah Carey. And what was I listening to yesterday that I was like, oh my God, I forgot about that song. Christina Aguilera, Come On Over.
A good one.
So good, right? And I was like dancing, having a ball. Like if you have a drive, like sing, dance along to music, or pick something that you can do every single day that when you do that thing, it makes you feel super feminine. It could be putting on lipstick, it could be dancing, singing, some other type of creative expression, something that makes you feel super feminine, and do that either on your way to your man or before you get there and interact with him. Or as soon as you get home, go do the thing. Maybe it's a shower, dance in the shower. I don't know. But I found that for me and a lot of other women I've worked with, if you stick to that, if you commit and you pick one thing that you train yourself that triggers, that transition back into more feminine energy, it makes a world of difference. Have you tried that, Gabriela?
No, I haven't. Currently, I'm single. I have yet to find the man.
Okay, but thanks for saying that because actually, like whether you're single or not, still do the transition ritual.
That's a good one. Yeah, I think that's a good way to anchor the transition. I love it. I had another question. I had a follow-up question, and it may not necessarily be a follow-up question, so I'm just going to ask it.
Okay.
Neither men or women are bad, right? Neither groups are bad. However, I want to talk about, I don't know if you're familiar with this concept. I took a course a few years back that talked about why we have so many beta men. A lot of men that are yes men, and they are not in their divine masculine. And it's because as a society, we've conditioned them to be that way, to the point that those group of men do not know how to act for the fear that they'll be called assholes, jerks, like mansplaining, toxic masculinity, etc. And so how do we make the gap smaller where women that are so much in their masculine, like to the point that they're crushing the man's desire to even be an alpha male and to be a healthy alpha male? Because I don't think there's anything wrong with being alpha. That's fine. But is it a healthy? Is it like a healthy expression of the masculine? So what do you think for our listeners? Most of them are women. What do you think that the modern woman needs to do to create more space for the man to be a man? And like, how do we do that transition? Because there's a lot of men out there that are afraid to express who they really are. I also work with men, and I've had quite a few clients come across, and they're afraid to express themselves because they want to be supportive to the women that they're in a relationship with. They don't want to be perceived as, right, like aggressive or like jerks or whatever the case may be. What can we do to shorten that gap and ultimately dissolve it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's two things, and I actually think it's quite simple. One of them is be feminine. The answer is simple. Learning to really embody your feminine can take a lot of practice and work. I don't want to diminish that, but be feminine around men. That in and of itself will inspire them to take the masculine role, even with friendships, right? Like, even if you're hanging out with a male friend and you're super in your feminine, that alone is going to inspire him to take that role, because somebody has to when you're hanging out or in whatever situation, right? And then the other thing I would say is encourage the things that actually use your words and encourage what men doing and you want more of. So it's powerful for any human to focus on the positive aspects and like reinforce positive behaviors and use encouragement, right? It's like the carrot versus the stick, or just focusing on those positive things and encouraging people is going to be way more effective to change behavior than criticizing or saying you're not doing this, you're not doing that. And these poor men, for I don't know how many years now, women have been saying, I want a sensitive man. I want a man who expresses his feelings. And it's, ladies,
You have it.
now you've got them, but you don't want to have sex with them. Yeah, I would also like to just caveat that with there's a very big difference between, yes, I think we all want a man who's in touch with his feelings and knows what he's feeling, but that is very different than the constant expression of feelings, which is very feminine. And in fairness, I struggle with that myself all the time. I'm like, how come I don't know how you're feeling? And I catch myself, I'm like, never mind, he's a man. I actually don't want him to express it all the time. Sometimes I'm like, I just want to know all the time what's going on inside of you. But I digress. So I get it, ladies, it's hard, but stop telling men that you want them to show their feelings all the time, and encourage and tell them the things that you really love that they do. For example, if a man you're at lunch with on a date or with a friend or whatever, maybe they open the door for you. You can say, oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That makes me feel so supported or so taken care of. Compliment them, give them encouragement, that positive feedback, with appreciation and telling them how it makes you feel or what it provides for you. And I use those words very intentionally: appreciation and what it provides for you and how it makes you feel in your feminine expression. Express this in a feminine way. Oh my gosh, I feel so, like, really show it. They'll respond, and then that'll be more data points in their brain. Ooh, okay. Or if you're in danger, or when they get a little aggressive, or they pull out the little machismo for you and they're like protecting, you can express, oh my gosh, I felt so taken care of and so safe and protected. I really love that. And this is how we close the gap. And I think it's all of the women recognizing that if they want this in a man, that's how we close the gap. These, as you said, like beta men, I feel horrible for them, right? Because it's our fault as women. And they've done what we asked them to do. And now we don't want to sleep with them.
That's
These
right.
poor men.
And sorry, I know Cindy
Go
wants
ahead.
to add to it, and it's not just us as society, but it's also the food that's out there, because there's so much soy in all the food that's out there, so that it's creating this, like, on top of suppressing their voice, we're also like, we as the society, we're poisoning them slowly and introducing more estrogen that in terms, it like creates even more emotions and more femininity within them. But I know, Cindy, you
Oh
had
my gosh.
things to add.
No,
Oh
I
my
was just going
gosh.
to, that's all valid points, and I agree with you 1,000,000% on that, but Gabriella, but I was having it, so I'm also technically single. I was dating somebody for 10 years and we were separated for 2 years, separated on good terms, still in love. We wanted different things, so I moved on. But 2 years has passed, and he's recently come back into my life, and we're trying to talk about things and see if it could work this time. We've done a lot of changing and a lot of work. I won't bore you with the details, but we were having this conversation the other night about how women treat their men, like even masculine men, right? So like the social media, the TikTok shit, like the pranks that they pull. So they'll call and say, or be on the phone and say, oh yeah, as soon as he leaves or whatever, like just trying to emasculate this man to see how he's going to react. Like that's causing a big problem too in our relationships and society, because the man's not going to want to fuck around with this for a long time. They're going to be like, stop being so immature. So like the maturity levels of people who have gone down just because of these stupid TikTok challenges or Instagram challenges or whatever the case may be. But like, it's just how to make your man look stupid in different situations. And I was like, I didn't even think about that, because I'll watch some of those videos. I'm like, oh, this is funny. But now I'm looking at them in a different way, because he pointed it out that this is not cool for men. Like it's making men look stupid. And I will agree with him. It led to other conversations about what we wanted and stuff in a relationship and this and that moving forward. But I was wondering, like, your thoughts about the social media challenges and how like social media is affecting actual relationships, and also on the flip side, right? Like the relationships of people who are like, oh, we're perfect and here's this perfect relationship and nothing goes wrong in our relationship and we're so perfect. And I think is just as damaging as the women pulling pranks on their husbands, trying to get them to do stupid things or say stupid things or think they're cheating or like whatever the case may be. I was curious about your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I agree. I think all of those pranks, they're super emasculating. But honestly, like
Agreed.
dating apps are also emasculating. Like I feel like a ton of our societal structure right now is just now emasculating men. I fully am of the opinion that men are now the ones who are being marginalized more so than anyone else.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah, like gender wise. I'm not going to comment on other things that I don't know about, but yeah, and it's just so normal. And yeah, I think social media perpetuates that, and it's not funny. I think it's sad how it is funny. Like this is what's being viral content and what's going around. And yeah. But yes, these challenges certainly just then encourage women to continue emasculating men and then get validation in doing it. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super damaging, I think. And then same like with I think it's a different type of issue, the couples who are posting all the time saying our relationship is perfect, blah blah blah. I think that's a different issue with social media where people only post what they want other people to see. And that's really damaging for mental health in general. right? Because I can't even imagine growing up in the social media age and being so inundated with all of that. It's hard enough to be a teenager. Never mind with social media and feeling your life is not as good as what you're seeing online, which nobody's life is. Almost nobody is authentic on social media. And then on the piece about the couples thing, I just want to say something that may help women a little bit. I think that men don't know, a lot of women get upset when it's my man won't post me on social media. And so I just want to say that men protect and keep private what is most important to them and what they value the most. So if your man isn't posting you on social media, that's actually probably a sign that he values you more than if he is posting you all the time on social media, because that's just in a man's nature to protect and keep private what he most values. So just a thought on that for all of
It's
the
funny
women
that
who
you
might be listening. Yeah.
It's actually really funny you said that, because that was actually one of the problems we had early on in our relationship, is like, you never post pictures of it. Like doesn't want anything. And then like later on moving forward, like later on in the relationship, I'm like, I really appreciate that he's not putting me out there like that, because then I can control what I want my narrative to be. So I
Yeah.
say vice versa. Like wasn't posting stuff about him either. But as you were talking, I was also thinking about, I've been recently like rewatching old TV shows and old movies, and then I was thinking about what's the difference between those and like the new things. And if you've noticed, like the TV shows and movies have had a shift too of just the man is always the butt of the joke. The dad is always like the dad is always the asshole. The mom is like or the girls are the stronger of the thing. And so like I went back and watched Who's the Boss. Granted, he worked for her, but he was still the man of the house, right? Like they looked to him for things, and he was the man of the house and the dad figure, the male masculine figure. And even though he had quote unquote feminine job, they still built up his masculinity. But then you have like shows now where it's just the dad is always the butt of the joke. The dad is always the weaker person and the weakest person in the show. The male is it's just completely flip-flopped. That I know we keep saying social media, but I think it's just generally in all media, like movies, TV, like everything. It's just, how do we make men look bad? And it seems like safe it's a safe landing pad for a butt of a joke, because there's so much stuff. But at this point, like just the same with like other things, like if everything is toxic masculinity, then nothing is toxic masculinity. Like it's just gotten to a point now where it's not even, that doesn't even have a validity to it anymore. And the culture of women lying about things that happen to them, I don't know, like I've been in a man dominated industry for 25 years, and think men say stupid shit all the time, like it joking around. But I've seen in the last 25 years the shift from like a fun environment to careful what you say. And I don't think that's fair either, because like I'm coming into a male dominated industry. Like why should then they have to change everything about who they are so that I can fit in, right? Like, why am I not trying to fit in a little bit more with that? I definitely do. I don't take shit personal, and whatever, like jokes are jokes. I think they're funny no matter what, like, know what it is. But also I can take what I like and leave the rest and leave it alone. But just, I think that we're learning how to treat men by these TV shows and movies. And it's just constantly, we're inundated with it constantly, that life is no fun anymore. Like everybody has to be so careful walking on eggshells, what they say, what they do, how they do it, so that they don't look like they're being an asshole, or they get me too'd, or they're like, they say something wrong. And that's not fair to the women who actually do have trauma from that, some kind of trauma because of that. But just, I'm also a big proponent that if you lie about something like that, like about a sexual assault, then that woman should go to jail. I'm a big proponent of that. You can't do that. You can't fuck up somebody's life. But at the same time, like, it's so easy to do, because believe all women, men are trash. I don't know. Have you noticed that shift in TV and movies and that kind of stuff as well? Even songs, right? Like music. But
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I think definitely the feminist movement, the goal was equality. And that shifted from equality to
dominance.
I can be an independent woman and I don't need a man over several years, right? But we really saw, I think the height of that was in the early 2000s with music. We had all of those, the Webbies, Indepent, that song, the Destiny's Child, Miss Independent. There's
No scrubs.
totally. And then now it's become women, it's like a narrative of women are the superior gender, right? So it went from we want equality to, which in my opinion, we had equality. It was just, it looked different. Yeah. I've been doing some research on the women's suffrage movement for a book that I'm writing at the moment, and it's been very interesting.
I'm going to pull out my soapbox in a minute and I'm going to get on it. Continue.
Okay. Yeah. And so I think it's gone from wanting equality in politics and work environment to independence, don't need a man, to women are the superior gender. And that's the narrative now. And I actually have a friend who went on a date a couple weeks ago, and the girl that he went on a date with literally said to him, women are clearly the superior gender. And he was like, how are we supposed to even start off here? This was a first date. And he's like, how is this going to go if I not only have to show up and prove myself to you as an individual human, but I have to overcome your bias of an entire gender? Like you don't even respect me. How are we supposed to go forward? So yeah, I think that's the movies and like all media really reflects that shift. And I'm here for the old movies too. The new stuff, I can't watch it. I just cry. I feel like, I don't know, I just cry all the time when I see men getting hurt and emasculated. I think it's because I have always been super, super close with my dad. And he was actually a stay-at-home dad. And my mom was the working parent, which was very controversial at the time. So my parents played the reverse roles, which I think gives me an interesting, yeah, perspective. But he and I were super close. We still are very close. We're like ride or dies. And I think that might be part of it too. But I got to watch the old stuff.
What do you think about, sorry, Gabriela, I didn't know if I'm stepping on your toes, but I was thinking, what do you think about the dynamic of, so we both have our work, my dad's gone now, but we're both close to our dads and we both had those strong male images and examples in our life, in which my dad passed down to my brother, which he now gets to be a good man for another person and show that example to his daughter, so on and so forth. What little girls who don't get their dads in their life for whatever reason, do you think that's the nuclear family breakdown having to do with, are you laughing because you agree, or are you laughing at me because I'm silly? I really think that has a lot to do with how grown-up women now treat men based off of how they were treated or not treated growing up, because a single mom might be like, oh, your dad's trash, or men are trash, or men suck and they did this or whatever. But my example and your example probably was a lot different. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad went and out and did all the stuff. But my dad was also at every soccer game, at every softball game, he was the coach for all of the stuff. And he made sure he also did that kind of stuff. Just like the example you get at home, how important do you think that plays a role in how you grow up and then treat the opposite sex?
I do think it's super important. I think not only having those role models, and I think it affects how men treat women too, right?
Agreed.
The way but I think so much those early formative years, it really impacts us so much in how we perceive the world. And I also think it's what's modeled to us. I do think that the loss of the nuclear family unit is definitely not serving us well as a society. But yeah, I do think that even because you can have a nuclear family and a really unhealthy, abusive dynamic too.
Agreed.
So I think that but definitely what's being modeled to you in those formative years is going to have a huge impact in that. Yeah.
I had a question for you. So I have a theory, and I haven't done all the research to back it up. However, my intuition is pretty strong on it. So I think I'm onto something. So my dad actually passed away when I was relatively young. I was starting to be a teenager. And I've had a few other incidents when I was young, not like sexual in any sort, but traumatic, right? Like when I was 4, Romania had a civil unrest where the communist regime was taken down. And so I had several instances throughout my life where my nervous system was challenged and I couldn't find safety in the various situations. And so then when I got to college, and I also grew up, just so you know, I grew up in a very strict religious household, Greek Orthodox. And so I didn't start being intimate with people until I got to college. I was 18. And so then I had a lot of anger, frustration built up in my 20s, which led me to be sexually abused. And after, I'm taking responsibility because I had a lot of anger, which I attracted, and then a situation I created. And after that point, I turned to women and I started dating women. And I liked how you said earlier, there's a certain safety within women that you can't find anywhere else. And that's 100% true. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I think because there's a lot of families out there that are either broken up or there's a lot of single parents. Those people that are having these experiences do not have an ability to co-regulate their nervous system, and they create all this chaos and tumultuous energy and experiences that they create. And then one thing leads to another, and then they turn to same-sex relationships as a trauma response, as a way to find safety because the other sex did not feel safe. They violated the space, the intimate space, whatever. So I was curious to see, what do you think about that? Do you think there's any truth to that? Have you had any experiences? Because when I was in the LGBTQ, add whatever other letters are out there, when I was looking around with the women that I was with, they were all from single parent homes. And we had similar experiences where like the men, either they were not present, either they were abused, or whatever the case may be. So I was just curious to see your perspective on that.
Yeah, I do agree. First of all, thank you for sharing your story. And yeah, I think that is really common. I think even for myself too, I really being with women was so healing. And yeah, I think that I think it's also easier probably for women than men, because for this phenomenon to happen, because I think that we are more naturally adaptable. And also sex with a woman, like it doesn't really matter where you are on the Kinsey scale as a woman. It's going to be pleasurable and enjoyable. You know what I mean? Like
Oh yeah, I remember.
yeah.
Yes.
I'm like, yeah, and I don't think that's true necessarily for men's experience with other men. There's a lot more psychologically that I think goes into that, and the power dynamics of penetrating versus being penetrated. But generally, sex with other women, it can involve penetration, but it certainly doesn't have to, right? That's not happening unless it's with fingers or whatever, right? With just our own bodies. So I think it's much easier and like less of a psychological, like, what does this mean for women in the sex space than it is for men. So I think it's much easier for women to be with other women and have that safety and make that transition and potentially be confused about, oh, I'm gay, when maybe you just have trauma. And I think it's probably I think we're making a generalization for sure. And I also think that being gay and having certain sexual preferences is also, or romantic preferences is 100% valid. And I don't want to invalidate anyone's experience that they're having. But I do think that, yes, that makes sense to me, has also been my experience. And I've also found that it's just like almost every single woman I know has some sort of sexual trauma. Actually, I think every
Unfortunately.
single woman I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's 9 out of 10 women that have all been abused at some point in some way, in some form.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's probably mostly by men. And I don't think that's malicious. I don't think that men are, and I think that sometimes it is malicious, 100%. There are bad people. There are bad men. There are bad women. They're just, and men are physically bigger and stronger, and we are the weaker physically and easier to take advantage of. So that does exist. And I think a lot of times it can be traumatic for women, but didn't necessarily have malintent on the other side. Of course, this is case by case. But I think that for women, because of these experiences we've had, being with other women in erotic energy, it doesn't matter if you want to have sex with other women, date other women or not. I think that being in erotic energy, sharing that, whether it's like you can just do sensual massage with friends or just play with sensation play, or it doesn't have to become inherently sexual, but I think just sharing erotic energy and seeing another woman in that erotic energy gives so much permission for you to be in yours. And I think it really unlocks a part of our sensuality that we struggle to really be fully free in on our own or when we're with men. And I don't know about you, but I found that for me, after being with women and sharing that erotic energy with other women, it allowed me to access a part of myself that I've been keeping like locked up. And now I can access that with whoever, men, women, whoever. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what else to say about that. It's a really tough topic.
You answered it beautifully, and I appreciate
Thank
you
you.
being so candid.
I feel a little left out now. I've only been with men.
There's still time, Cindy. There's still time.
There
Totally.
really is, but I just have no interest, unfortunately. Sad for me. Such is life, right? But I'm going to be some respectful of your time here. And thank you, Kayla, for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here. Can tell people where they can find you on social media, and when your new book comes out, we'll have to have you back and you could talk about your book.
Yeah, I would love that. You can find me on social media at XFXM Global and also at by Kayla Yoder. Depends if you want to see what's going on in my personal life or if you want to see what's going on in the business. And yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. It was such a pleasure. I really enjoyed this conversation, and
I can't speak for Gabriela, but I really enjoyed this conversation too. Thank you so much for being so open and honest and willing to speak about hard things. Yeah. And to everybody else listening, thank you for joining us this week. Please can subscribe on all of our platforms, and you can follow us on Instagram and TikTok at The Uncensored Journey. You can follow me at The Worth Warrior, and you could follow Gabriela at Phoenix Medicine. And we'll see you next week. Have a great week.